education. It starts at Berkeley, where you have a professor of education like Zeus Leonardo, which, by the way, was my stripper name when I was working my way through law school.
No, I was going to say that's your real name, though, right?
Zeus Leonardo teaching teachers to understand race with a Marxist filter.
Commitment to social justice. That CRT research isn't just satisfied with describing the world as it is, but it is about intervening in that world. Not dissimilar to what Marx once said, that philosophy has hitherto described society. The point is to change it, right? Now I step into Marxism, which is a second critical framework for understanding race. This is one that a lot of people arguably aren't used to, because correctly speaking, most people understand Marxism as offering analysis or critical analysis of class. But Marxist theories of racism do offer fundamental challenges to race thinking and race thought, where they argue that race, in quotation marks here, is unavoidably caught in a reification of what is at heart an ideological or made-up concept.
Mm-hmm. And these skulls full of mush at Berkeley that are indoctrinated by Zeus Leonardo then are dispatched throughout America to wind up at places like Franklin Woods Intermediate School in Columbus, Ohio, where a sixth grader filmed his teacher instructing them on what they learned from people like Zeus Leonardo.
Some people might call it racist. There's actually three categories. If you've read the book Stamped, you'll hear that there's three areas. There's anti-right, there's anti-racist, which is a person who works to end racism, an activist, someone who is active. And that's what I was trying to be. I was reading books, I was going to rallies, I was trying to be in that group. Then there's the opposite, which is someone who is racist, who discriminates against people of a certain group, and that sort of thing. But then there's a middle group. A middle group is what most people are. Most people don't actively work to end racism, and most people don't work to be in the racist group. So most people are in that middle group called an assimilationist. An assimilationist doesn't actively work to end it and doesn't work to be in the racist group.
And this is the sort of thing that has parents appropriately up in arms, not enough actually, about what's happening in the schools when with the masks on or the masks off. It really doesn't matter. For more on all of this, including an update on his one-man band efforts to apply Title IX equitably and equally at the collegiate level, pleased to be joined again by Mark Perry, professor of economics and finance at the University of Michigan, and the blogger for the American Enterprise Institute, a blog I refer to often. Carpe Diem is Mark Perry's blog. Mark, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Yeah, hi, Dan. Hi, Amy.
So that's a supply chain of critical race theory, train the trainer at the collegiate level, and then the teachers go on to K through 12 school systems around the country to do the same. That certainly comes as no surprise to you. You've seen what's going on in college campuses, starting with your own.
Sure, yeah, it's been going on for a while now, and I think, words and slogans are important. So when we talk about CRT, I think we should make sure we understand that means creating racial tensions. So this is a cancer on the human spirit and identity politics and critical race theory. It removes what makes everybody unique and erases all of our individuality and says that our, individual identities are subjugated by some collective identity based on our census categories. So this is really should be viewed as, going backwards and a great cancer on the human spirit. And notice the one person they never mentioned anymore is Martin Luther King, who wanted a colorblind society. They now want a color conscious society. So it's like turning everything Martin Luther King stood for upside down, and you just know that they never will refer to Martin Luther King anymore because that doesn't fit the narrative.
Or so much of what Frederick Douglass had to say. But there's something else about this, too. They have to lie about where it's being taught, not only what it is, but where it's being taught. This is something that's esoteric. It's only taught in law schools, and you have undercover video after undercover video and classroom excerpt after classroom excerpt. If you're so proud of this instruction, if it's so important, if it's so enlightened and forward-looking, then why do you have to lie about its occurrence?
Well, sure, and it doesn't matter what you call it, but if they're teaching kids starting in grade school that America is a horrible, bad place and that white people are horrible and bad, that's really the problem. And, it's kind of ironic that here we have hundreds of thousands of people who are black and brown trying to come to the United States from Haiti and Central and South America. And yet we keep hearing from the progressives and the leftists that this is a horrible, bad place that's infected by white supremacy and it's forever infected by, suppression of minorities. So then it's kind of interesting that then at the same time, all these black and brown people want to come to the United States. At the same time, they're telling us that America is inherently infected by systemic racism, and yet why would these other people then be wanting to come here? So there's a lot to really criticize, but I think people are starting to wake up. I think we've seen that around the country. So I think we're seeing a turn in this, and so hopefully it's gaining momentum because even liberal parents are not wanting to put up with having their kids taught that they're bad and inherently racist just because of their skin color.
Well, but look at the parents that speak up at school boards. Now they're being, labeled domestic terrorists, and they could be investigated under the Patriot Act.
Yeah, well, I think that'll just embolden them in a way because they know that they're not doing anything illegal, and there's local law enforcement, state law enforcement, even if there's federal law enforcement, that's not going to stop them, I don't think, from going to school boards and speaking up or voting in new members of school boards around the country that are a little more reasoned and balanced. So I think we've got this turned around a little bit in a way that I think a year or two from now, we might see that there's been a lot of progress, especially after next year's elections.
People are starting to take notice of something that you've been documenting for some time now, which is the distribution of achievement at the collegiate level, men versus women in terms of undergraduate degrees and postgraduate degrees. You noted recently that women for the 12th year in a row earned the majority of postdoctoral degrees. And yet at the same time, you're also this one-man band filing Title IX and Title VI complaints with the Office of Civil Rights for the violations of the civil rights laws that colleges are committing mainly against men. Can you sync those two up for us?
Yeah, sure. And, men, people don't even realize this. Men have been an underrepresented minority in higher education for 40 years now by college enrollment and associate's degrees and bachelor's degrees and master's degrees. Usually when we have underrepresented minorities, they're the ones that get the attention to provide them with extra resources or help or assistance to make sure that they're successful. But in this case, it's women who've been an overrepresented majority for 40 years that continue to get a majority share of all of the campus resources in terms of scholarships, fellowships, funding, special programs. And so it's really kind of a disconnect. It's like we're back in the 1950s as if women are still struggling or facing challenges getting into school or getting through school when it's the exact opposite. I call it the most remarkable economic success story in American history, the rise of women in higher education, where they just dominate higher education now. So there's no longer any need that they would have to get a majority share or disproportionate share of campus resources to encourage them to stay in school or to give them all of the funding that they're getting, all of the special help and attention, when really they don't need that anymore. And so not only is it illegal, but it's also unnecessary. And then I think it's also unethical and immoral to say, okay, we have men and women in college, we're going to direct a huge disproportionate share of taxpayer resources towards the group that has demonstrated how successful they are, and they're actually a supermajority or majority in higher education. So that's why I've filed now up to 372 complaints for probably 1,500 violations of Title IX and Title VI. I'm sure I haven't uncovered even a fraction of what's going on because it just takes a lot of time to get on the university's website to figure out what they're doing that's illegal.
Well,
so I'm making some progress, and hopefully I'll make more in the future.
Well, give us some examples too of some of the programs that you've called out that are gender based and that have been remedied, that where the university was forced to remediate what they were doing.
Yeah, well, they're up to about 78 resolutions, mostly in my favor, where it's usually the way it's supposed to work, because Title IX and Title VI are very clear legal standards and legal laws that are not complicated. It's saying that no person on the basis of sex shall face discrimination, or no person on the basis of race shall face discrimination. And the violations are very clear, because I only present violations to the Office for Civil Rights when it's very clear that there's discrimination. And so usually what will happen if the Office for Civil Rights is doing its job, they'll agree that there's discrimination going on, and then they'll force a university to either discontinue a program that's illegal because it discriminates on the basis of sex, or they'll force them to convert it from a single-sex, female-only or girl-only program into a co-educational program for all genders and make it clear on the website that it's now open to everybody. Or in some cases, they could offset a female-only or girl-only program with a comparable, equivalent boy-only or male-only program. So usually that's what will happen. That's the outcome I'm looking for, is that the universities have to stop discriminating and just discontinue programs that violate Title IX and Title VI, or they have to convert those into programs that are open to all 50 or 60 genders, or whatever the number is now, and they have to stop discriminating in favor of women and against men and all the other gender identities that often don't fit in to the eligibility requirements for a female-only program. So there's a number of universities where that's happened, where they've either discontinued the program or they've converted it into a co-educational program, and that's what I'm looking for.
I mean, ultimately, women's sports is going to go by the wayside. We fought so hard in the 70s to get female sports teams, and now this is going to happen.
Well, no, I think, in terms of athletics, and I haven't touched anything about athletics because all I'm looking at are, academic programs, single-sex scholarships that are for women only, or girl-only summer STEM programs. So the athletic part, I think, is still okay. I think there's still, and that's Title IX. That was its kind of original application, was to make sure that men and women had the same opportunities for athletics. And I think that's still the case. But now what we're looking at here is the huge gender imbalance in terms of women getting all of this special help and preference and financial aid and resources that men aren't getting. So it's way out of balance on the academic side, even though it might still be somewhat in balance on the athletic side of the universities.
And despite the landscape you're describing, and despite the fact that overall, 12th year in a row, the most postgraduate degrees, women earned the most postgraduate degrees. In two categories, they were outnumbered 3-1 in terms of earning postgraduate degrees. Engineering and computer science, despite all of the focus, all of the effort, all of the illegal programs that are trying to advance women in STEM and so forth, still the case in computer science and engineering. How do you reconcile that? Is it just that discrimination is just that much more systemic than in every other discipline?
No, I think it reflects just the natural abilities and interest of men and women going to undergraduate and graduate programs. I've been tracking, undergraduate degrees at the bachelor's level for the last 50 years, and it's interesting how it seems to be the case that men and women sort themselves out just voluntarily based on their own abilities and their interests in different academic fields. And for the last maybe 20 years, women have gotten 20% of degrees in engineering and computer science, and that really hasn't changed at all. So despite this whole effort to try to achieve what they call gender parity in computer science and engineering, it's just not working. And it's maybe the case that one computer science professor told me that women can code just as well as men or boys. It's just that they don't want to, or that they have other abilities or talents. So when we look at the distribution and gender shares of college degrees, it's clear that women get a far majority, 70-80% of the degrees in fields like psychology, education, health sciences, communications, and even biology. So in that STEM field, women get about 60% of the degrees at bachelor's and master's and doctoral level. So it's just the idea that men and women, they go into college, there's no barriers or discrimination anymore against a woman getting a degree in computer science or engineering. but it's just we're trying to like socially engineer what I think is an unnatural outcome, that it's just that men and boys are more interested in computer coding than girls and women, and that then reflects itself in the fact that more men than women get degrees in computer science and in engineering. So very technical, highly mathematical, quantitative fields. It just still seems like boys either have a natural advantage, and they do get significantly higher scores on the math SAT, which might explain why then they do better in college, and also just in terms of natural interest. Or maybe women are good at coding, that they're also really good at writing or other fields, and they just decide to specialize in something that they find more interesting and maybe has more human contact than writing computer coding. So I think that's just a natural consequence of biological differences in the way men and women think, and the way that they then will, sort themselves out voluntarily into different degree programs.
He is Mark Perry, professor of economics and finance at the University of Michigan and the Carpe Diem blogger for the American Enterprise Institute. Do check out his Carpe Diem blog there. Mark, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Thanks, Amy.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Hear about the big stories of the day, then talk about them right here on Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Everybody knows I love a good joke. So here we go. Knock, knock. Who's there? Not you. If you don't use United Faith Mortgage to get a pre-approval letter. All right. Seriously, though, in this competitive real estate market, you need to have a pre-approval letter to get your dream home. And the real estate market has calmed down a little bit. Mortgage rates are still amazing. So now's the time to